Thank you for joining us all, and welcome to the first of the Cities and Environment online guest seminars. My name is Matt. I'm a member of the Digital Futures team at the University of Manchester, and I'm just going to quickly go through some housekeeping before I hand over to Professor Evans. So this seminar is part of the events program for the Cities and Environment research theme at Digital Futures. I'm going to post a link in the chat to the Digital Futures website where you can learn more about all of our themes of activity. At the end of this presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. I would ask that you please provide them using the chat function, which will be in your sidebar. Ideally, if you post your questions as they occur to you, we'll be able to address them all in order at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Professor James Evans and Dr. Dave Topping, who will be presenting on their work with the Manchester Urban Observatory. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see you here. I'm aware it's the end of August, so it's really good to see so many of you here, some familiar faces and some new people as well. So my name is James Evans. As Matthew says, I'm a professor in the Department of Geography in the School of Environment, Education and Development. My work's been looking at sustainable cities for about 20 years now, focusing on how cities transform themselves, if you like, into becoming more sustainable. That, over the last 6 or 7 years, has led me more into the domain of smart cities and trying to understand the role that technology and data can play in improving urban governance and decision making. My conspirator on this, who's the co-PI on the Manchester Urban Observatory, is Dave Topping, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, hi everyone. Really good to see you all virtually. So yeah, I'm Dave Topping. I work in the Centre for Atmospheric Science. Traditionally, I guess I'm a numerical modeler of the atmosphere and its composition. I'm working with James and through the Urban Observatory network. My areas of interest, areas of focus really straddle detection technologies and simulation technologies, covering different elements of air quality, but also urban mobility and I guess the e-infrastructures needed to map the data products together and do something useful with them, really.
Super, thanks Dave. We're going to be bouncing between each other for this presentation. You'll notice all of the awkward, difficult slides I passed to Dave to talk about. So we'll just see if this is still scrolling. Nope, it looks like I have to reshare my screen, so just bear with me 1 second. Okay, hopefully that is back now. Lovely. So we're called the Manchester Urban Observatory. There's 5 other urban observatories around the country. You can see them to the right of this slide. And we are part of a broader consortium called UKCRIC, which is the UK Collaboratorium for Research on Infrastructure and Cities, which is a bit of a mouthful, and I had nothing to do with the choice of the word collaboratorium, so please don't hold that against us. Essentially, it's a national group of researchers, mostly led by civil engineers, who convinced the government that national research capacity around urban infrastructure was strong but fragmented, and the government funded £140 million of cash to try and pull that capability together under this umbrella called UKCRIC. So most of the money has been allocated to labs, new labs, engineering capacity, but a tranche of it was allocated to these things called urban observatories. And the idea here was that there was a need to understand cities, infrastructure performance in cities, to try and get a handle on how we can use data, sensors, Internet of Things, to get a better idea of what's going on in UK towns and cities. So I guess the idea that we can use cities as labs to understand more about urban challenges, but also to test out different kinds of solutions to things like air pollution, mobility, and so on. And the idea over time is that these 6 urban laboratories, these 6 urban observatories coalesce and develop kind of similar approaches to handling urban data and urban sensing. In terms of the observatories, there's a set of goals around smart cities and digitization. The top left one's probably the one that's closest to my heart, as someone whose research naturally works with urban planners and policymakers, and that's really enabling evidence-based decision making. So cities are quite complex systems. Municipalities have smaller and smaller budgets and fewer people working in them. So there's a real need for more evidence about what's happening in cities, what works. If we're going to invest money in fixing things like air quality, we need to know exactly what works so we can spend that money in the most effective way possible. So for me, that's the real bigger goal around all of this, enabling evidence-based decision-making in cities. And then there's, I guess, some of the interesting challenges around how you monitor cities. So the bottom right, long data baselines. So there's surprisingly little data concerning things like air quality, traffic flows that we have over a long-term kind of data set that allows you to understand changes that are happening now. So there's a feel that we need to start capturing data in cities sooner rather than later so that we can understand some of these longer term changes. And based upon that, we can do things like post-intervention analysis in the bottom left. So this might be intended interventions, like, for example, filtered neighborhoods, something like that. Or it might be unintended interventions, like the COVID lockdown. So we start to be able to understand what the impacts of those things are on urban systems. And then the top right, understanding essentially how we can start modeling cities. So we need better data to understand, to be able to develop decent digital twins of bits of cities. So the overview of what we're doing, we got £1 million. It was a capital grant, so it covers mostly equipment and some staff time to support and deploy that equipment. It's 2 years with the hope of an extension, COVID related. And it's a kind of 3-way hookup between the Urban Institute, the Environment Research Institute, and Digital Futures. The vision, our really small vision, that the catchiest we could make it, was to work with communities and researchers to understand and improve urban environments using data and sensors. One of the things we did when we started off last year was run some workshops across the university. Some of you may have been in those workshops, trying to bring together people with an interest in urban research, but from across the 3 faculties, to try and understand what the University of Manchester offer was. And we came up with this triple offer, if you like, around health, environment, and governance. These are 3 things that we have critical mass on at the University of Manchester. And I think when you put them together, you get something quite unique. So there's other observatories in our network have air quality expertise. Some of them have some understanding of policy and working with decision makers, but none of them can put these 3 together. So for us, the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle of health, environment, and governance in cities. If we can bring those 3 things together, I think we'll have something really unique. In terms of how it looks, what the observatory actually is, that triangle on the right is my extremely basic effort to represent that. So at the bottom, you have some kind of living lab, which is using the Greater Manchester region as a kind of test bed, if you like, for developing for deploying new kinds of sensors, generating new kinds of data, trying to apply them to specific use cases that are of interest to the city and the various municipal authorities. It's about developing partnerships to try and address specific problems. And then on top of that, we have the Datahub, that's Manchester Eye, which hosts the data we produce and tries to expose it. And that can be to the research community, but also to end users and communities. And then at the top, you have the actual sensors. And a lot of our budget is being spent on sensors, whether it's air quality, traffic cameras, noise sensors, bioaerosol sensors, which are actually trying to increase our ability to understand the urban environment. So we're trying to build use cases from the bottom and then deploy the capabilities of data hubs and sensors to help address them. I'll pass over to Dave just for the next few slides, covering the sensors and the data platform.
Thanks a lot, James. In fact, can you rather smoothly just click to the next component of that slide? Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, I guess when anyone thinks of a general facility, the first thing you think about is the physical infrastructure. And you know, as James has mentioned, that one of the core components of the Urban Observatory is the sensors that we're investing in and want to deploy across city region to tackle a variety of remaining questions, be it environmental, public health related, or so on and so forth. And this is quite a challenging thing to do because there's quite a lot of things you need to think about in constructing this infrastructure. It needs to be available to as many people as possible, but that also has to include considerations around maintenance, calibration standards, support, data access from the instrument in question. So we've actually, over the first year, started building up a catalogue of instruments that cover things like mobility, air quality, be it, I guess, what you might call the traditional pollutants, so the NOx, ozone, PM 2.5, but also more, I'll call it esoteric because it's I guess it's a poor cousin of air quality, including bioaerosols. And what this picture is actually showing is one of our latest acquisitions called the Polano bioaerosol monitor from an instrument manufacturer in Switzerland that actually gives us real-time information on pollen types. And that's a box just sat on top of the Simon building at the moment, and that's collecting data. And a lot of these instruments fit naturally to within existing and ongoing programs, but also the choice behind the instruments we go with include what I've just said previously, which includes ease of use, giving the opportunity for people to develop instrument technologies, but also how they might align with where people across campus see the next opportunities being in the urban environment. And if you just click next, James, that would be great. And connected to this physical infrastructure is where the data goes. And Manchester Eye is the platform that we've chosen to host the data. And that's been developed over a number of years, but likewise is being developed at the moment for us to make the Urban Observatory something that has obviously an element of sustainability to it, not only over the next year, but over the next 3 to 5 years. If you just click the next slide, James. Thanks. And I won't go into too many details behind the instruments or the data platform in question, but do feel free to ask them when we finish the talk. But obviously there's a design consideration behind any data infrastructure. And what this diagram is trying to show, that there is a series of components to the data hub, all the way from archiving historical data and obviously including relevant metadata associated with that. So in a few years' time, people can actually make use of data that's collected through either bespoke projects or through generic activities we conduct through the observatory. But also a design in terms of the software and APIs that are needed to connect to a range of external sources, and then how you deliver that data to a range of stakeholders. And that might include not just academics, but also people working within regional authorities or e-health hubs, for example. And I've listed some of the specific sources that we're working with at the moment. At the top, we have something called Beelines, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a short while, where we're actually deploying mobility and air quality sensors in Leverhulme, collecting that data. But we also now have an agreement with Transport for Greater Manchester. So we're going to be co-sharing data from a lot of traffic monitors, Greater Manchester. That includes traffic volume and also vehicle time. So the subset of those camera technologies can also decipher vehicle type and bicycles and people walking along the street, and also distancing and dwell time. So there's a lot of opportunity there. We're also talking with Manchester Council at the moment about how we use this platform to also share some of their socioeconomic data. And all of these require different levels of conversations and different areas of focus, right? I mean, it's not just a case of designing the software, but also you can't just provide the data without any information surrounding it. And also how you provide that data and visualize it might be very important to how people want to use it. And of course, when it comes to health data, there's some really important concerns around privacy and design of the Datahub platform. So at the moment, this platform's being migrated to run on Amazon, the AWS system, for at least the next 3 years, working with Research IT, because there is expertise now in connecting, I guess, safe data with data that requires different levels of privacy concerns. And this actually also aligns with the recently funded NERC Digital Solutions platform, which I think James will talk about at the end. If you could just move on, that'd be great. So front-facing, Manchester Eye will provide, and does provide at the moment, although it is in continual development, a visualization of where the data is coming in, so that you can actually see from a Google Map perspective some of the data points that are currently capturing live data, and also data that's been captured in the past. And I think that was just showing an example of one of the DEFRA stations, so some of these standard air quality metrics that we're interested in. And then the next slide, you can interrogate each of the data points to the level of detail you require, such as, you know, what's the actual data we're collecting, what are the units, who might be the stakeholder, you know, what range of data, what range of dates does it cover. And I think on the next slide, you can also generate some simple time series plots, for example, so you could have a quick look-see of the data through the Manchester Eye before you download it to look at it yourself as well. And within the Manchester Eye platform, we will also list data according to the projects through which they're collected. And that's really useful in the sense that, you know, you come at these data access platforms from different angles. It might just be with, I guess, a pure research interest on things like air quality and mobility, or it might be through reading papers associated with specific projects. And we list some of the projects that we're currently involved with there, and that gives a start and end date, whether or not it's ongoing or not as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, there's a couple of important points there. So I hope it's becoming slightly clearer that the Urban Observatory isn't really a research project in a traditional sense. It's more of a facility, a platform to enable new forms of applied interdisciplinary urban research. And we have sensors people can borrow. We also have budget to purchase sensors for strategically useful projects. And we also have Manchester Eye, which can host data for projects. It can also archive data from projects. So we're hoping that as the amount of data in Manchester Eye develops, it becomes a useful resource for student projects, PhDs, other research projects, to try and just capture some of the wealth of work that's been done at the university on the local urban challenges. The picture on the right was our launch event from last year, which feels like about 100 years ago, because look, there's a crowd of people and a buffet, God forbid. The left gives you an idea of our partners. So our key partner is the City Council and TFGM. We have a series of private sector partners we're working with, some charities, and also down at the bottom, AriSense, a sensor manufacturer. So there's certainly a growing number of companies trying to develop things like urban air quality sensors. So it's quite an interesting emerging marketplace, and we're quite keen to partner with them where possible, help test their kit and help develop it as well. So just moving on to the research areas, and these are very much specific kind of use cases that we've developed so far based upon the Urban Observatory facility. So the mobile air quality measurements, Dave will say a bit more about air quality shortly. The cystic fibrosis health hub, so this was providing some health wearables to enable Pauline Whelan and Charlotte Stockton-Powdrill and their team to understand air quality impacts on the respiratory health of cystic fibrosis sufferers during COVID-19. The biological particulates in the urban environment is just getting going with that Swisson's Polano piece of kit that Dave described just now, and we're quite excited about that. I'll hand over to you, Dave, for this one with some specifics on the air quality work.
Yeah, so this is an example of a recent project that's been funded through the Strategic Priorities Fund Clean Air Programme. And I guess it's an example of how that we recognise the infrastructure that the Urban Observatory could provide to actually feed into well, this open opportunity as it was at the time. And so this, what DIMEX-UK is it's led by the Centre for Artificial Intelligence and Data Science in Exeter, and it's building a new agent-based exposure model of first Greater Manchester, but also then over the UK. The idea being that you could develop a new, and this was funded through the Met Office strand of the Clean Air Programme. The idea being that combining mobility data, socioeconomic data, transport data, and air quality data, there would be a new exposure model that would allow us to assess the impact of various air quality interventions on levels of exposure to pollution between different economic subgroups. And central to that is not only the physical infrastructure that we briefly mentioned, including some of the air quality and mobility monitors, but also the Manchester Eye platform. So basically integrating the data from TFGM with our air quality data, and then feeding that through to the data fitting process in Exeter. And what's listed at the bottom of this slide is something called the B network as well, which is, well, I mean, James could explain that more than I can, but I guess it's at the moment one of the areas of focus is in Leverhulme because of the traffic calming measures that are taking place. It gives us this perfect opportunity to look at actually very localized interventions and the impact it might have. There's also another acronym at the bottom there, the Manchester Air Quality Super Site, because we're also partnering with another UKRI investment, but that's specifically the Natural Environment Research Council investment. And that's based at the FIRS, which includes, I guess, very high, let's call it high research grade air quality instrumentation that gives us information on things like particulate composition. And that again will feed back through to the Manchester Eye and therefore the Urban Observatory and help integrate into projects like DIMEX-UK. And this is something that's ongoing for the next 2 years. And the data and modeling tools will be made openly available as well. So it's a nice, I guess it's a nice impact driven project that we could get funded because of the infrastructure. And hopefully gives that people an example of how you might think about using the Urban Observatory in a similar fashion.
Uh-oh, I think it might have frozen again. Oh no, there we go.
Oh, it's me again. Yep. And so, and what this slide is showing is actually how we've also been able to be responsive through the I guess the digital infrastructures and the conversations that we've had with Transport for Greater Manchester. So obviously everyone's seen in the media that the air quality improved during the COVID lockdown because of the reduction in activity. But what we've managed to do here is, kind of ironic that a motorbike's going past now, but what we've managed to do here is on the graph on the left, what you see is the data from the Manchester Piccadilly site with the concentration of NO2, so nitrogen dioxide, in the red line. And you'll see that up to the end of March, it varies diurnally as you would expect, but that generally drops off with a few peaks and troughs. And what we've managed to do is actually look at the usefulness of time series forecasting techniques that integrate the transport data that we can now access through the Urban Observatory platform and discussions, and actually reproduce the heavily reduced levels of NO2 through to the reductions in traffic. But also what's really nice is if you see those increases in the concentrations through the red line during early April, we've actually, with the air quality supersite and from some traditional air quality monitoring, been able to disentangle the contributions from regional background as well as from the local sources, so the reduced levels of traffic. And that provides us with a really nice example of what we can do quite quickly by pulling together the different data streams and having the right conversations. And that's been submitted for publication already. So it's just a demonstration of what we can and can't do, really.
Thanks, Dave. Other things we're interested in, health wearables, use of public space, especially green infrastructure and well-being, and air quality in schools. That newspaper article on the right was from late last year, where we helped Philips test out their indoor air purifiers in some schools across Greater Manchester. That was, again, quite a quick, responsive piece of work with Hugo and Julian Skirm. And more work. That the picture on the left, I guess, is about that broader piece about how we transform cities to make them more livable. And in that, I include sustainable and healthy. And we're trying to develop a number of projects working with specific developers on specific areas who are really keen to trial some cutting edge urban regeneration and development that really experiments with new kinds of streetscapes, new kinds of green infrastructure. But of course, what they're interested in and what they need to be able to show is that these things have significant positive impacts. And again, that's something we should be able to help with because it requires longer baselines. It requires quite dense sensor networks in particular places. Ideally, it requires engaging with residents to help do that work. But the research area is hopefully giving a flavour for the fact that this is very much a facility, a platform, and we absolutely need people, researchers, communities, end users to come to us with ideas and work with us to develop new opportunities. This gives some idea of ongoing funded work and what we're up to at the moment. You can see trying to develop a health strand to the work, as well as the kind of governance, public engagement, and the air quality piece. Some things in the pipeline as well. But really, the point of this talk is to hopefully give you an idea of what we're about, but more specifically, give you an idea of the opportunity. And really, this is an invitation to interested people across the university to explore how you might be able to work with us on this. We have the data platform, we have sensors, we still have some budget left for sensors. Sometimes people are coming to us with pressing problems that might be held by the council or another organization, and we can do something really quite quick. Dave's piece around the air quality and COVID is an example of that. The work with Philips is an example of that. In other ways, people are writing the observatory into their funding proposals as a form of match funding and saying the Urban Observatory will provide these sensors or these capabilities. So it's a way to make a research funding application look better value for money, more interdisciplinary, more integrated. So there's a whole series of different ways people are starting to work with us. And you can see here we've got a whole set of goals around engaging more people, students, researchers from across the university to try and generate a greater number and breadth of research projects around urban environments. So yeah, this is the end really, and the invitation is thus, can we add value to your existing work? Can you use us to leverage new kinds of work? Can you see ways in which we could work with master's students or PGRs or early career researchers or indeed research leaders? So thank you very much, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, James and Dave. We've got time now for some questions. After that, we've had a few pop up, so if any others come to mind, please remember to post them in the chat. So first comment from Mark Hudson, saying just for info, Manchester City Council has done nothing to collaborate with other local authorities about active travel. So if decision makers are not going to actually reduce the sources of air pollution, then it seems academic. Do you have any comments to that?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I think the City Council, they try to do, they're trying to do the right thing in terms of sustainable mobility, but they're trying to find a way to do that without impacting too much on existing traffic flows, and that's probably not sustainable in the long run. Our angle on it from this point of view is trying to see whether data and making data more available, more obvious, interpreting it in ways that make it clearer to decision makers and communities can change the nature of those decisions. So the work in Levenshulme is quite political. It's the first area which was funded to be part of the Active Neighbourhoods transformation. The idea was to filter the entire of Levenshulme, which would have made it the largest single filtered neighbourhood in the UK. As is always the case with these kinds of schemes, it ran into some local politics where there was a lot of pushback from a local motorist lobby who absolutely were unhappy with the idea any roads would be blocked off. But also another group locally who felt filtered neighbourhoods weren't the solution. And understandably, local councillors have come in and said, well, where is the evidence for some of this stuff? So we've currently got 4 mobility sensors and a couple of air quality sensors up, and we're going to double that number very shortly. And it's going to be an interesting experiment in what happens when you do provide hard evidence to people. This is how many cars drive past your house every day. This is how poor the air quality is. Because that's largely missing at the moment. So how are we going to help the situation? Well, for me, that's part of the intrigue of this work. What happens when you do start putting hard data in front of people in a compelling way? And our previous work I've been involved in suggests that data around traffic flow is powerful because everyone can understand it. You know, the number of lorries, the number of cars. Look, there's a surprising number of lorries go past at 5 a.m. People can relate to that very easily. And that then is the way in to the more involved kind of discussions around air quality, where the data is maybe not so easily digestible.
That's great. Thank you, James. So next question from Amanda Bamford. Where can we get copies of these graphs? I think that was particularly in relation to the air quality graphs that Dave was speaking to, but I think just in general, the data that you've used in this presentation, I presume it's how best to access that.
Well, happy to share it with whoever and whenever. This is stuff that we did offline from the Manchester Eye. So in terms of interpreting the time series forecasts, we could send the PDF of the submitted paper. It will be in open discussion anyway, so we can send to the link to that paper if that's helpful. That would be great.
Okay, thank you very much. I might include that whenever this is published on the Digital Futures page. I think I might include a link to that study at the time. Okay, and then final questions. Kinjiro Amano has posted 3. So this should link in with, a 4th now. I'm going to stop you from adding any more, Kinjiro. First question from Kinjiro. This ties into what you were just talking about, James. Could you give a list of sensors other than air quality?
So we, at the moment, we have a bunch of vivacity sensors, which are mobility sensors. They can capture pedestrians, bikes, cars, lorries, speeds, directions, paths. They'll even do them, you know, you put it on a junction, it'll do a 4-way junction. They're quite powerful. Some of our air quality sensors also cover noise. That bioaerosol sampler is capturing pollen and fungal spores. Dave, we got anything else? What am I missing here?
We've got MET stations as well. In fact, just answering the second question, or the third question, is we absolutely do evaluate with weather conditions, because you're right, it's a key determinant. In fact, that time series shows that from Piccadilly, even though transport was down 60–70%, levels rose back to I guess normal conditions under easterly flow. It was regional background, and when we look at the PM data for during COVID, PM hasn't changed really compared to the last 5 years. So there's conversations that need to be had about regional sources as well as local sources as well.
Okay.
The second part of that question, are the other 5 observatories running in a similar manner? So the answer to that is yes and no. So the other 5 all have slightly different focuses. So the Birmingham one is more focused on weather. The Sheffield one is more focused on buildings and, say, thermo imaging of retrofit and things like that. And that's almost the idea, because the goal of the network is that we start developing similar APIs, similar metadata, so that we can ingest a whole range of different types of data, but present it in a consistent way. So the idea is convergence in the sense of how we collect data and present it.
Okay, thank you very much. So shifting gears to Kevin Keith's question, just wondering if working with and learning from other cities outside of the UK, places like Singapore are quite advanced in integrating data into decision making, but there are other cities in South Korea, Australia, and Europe that are doing this. Part of a global network? Question mark.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had conversations with people in Hong Kong. We're aware of Singapore, but not had any conversations there. Some of the work on the Eastern Seaboard, North America, in terms of metropolitan dashboards, I think is also really valuable. This is one of the things the Urban Observatory Network was trying to do before COVID hit, and has kind of hampered us a little bit on this front. But thank you for those suggestions. If you have any like specific initiatives you think we should reach out to or look at, please drop them in the chat or drop them in an email to me.
Very good. Okay, and if we finish up things with our final question from Deanne Johnson, saying some great examples of public engagement, especially the opportunity to work with the residents as co-researchers. Do you have more plans for citizen science type projects?
Yeah, thanks, Deanne. I mean, there's huge potential for that here. So Newcastle set up their urban observatory first, and they're the most advanced in terms of doing this kind of work. And they have an initiative called Sense My Street, where they invited neighborhoods to borrow sensors from them for specific reasons. We haven't developed anything that's specifically focused on citizen science, but the things happening around the Levenshulme active neighborhood thing are, I think, going in that direction. So at the moment, we've got a whole range of people very interested in looking at the data from these sensors. I think it's highly likely some of them will start asking us if they can borrow some of our handheld air quality sensors, noise meters, and so on, to start basically using them themselves. One of the projects in the pipeline, the Links project, which Joe Revetz is leading, Sheena Cruikshank is involved in, that is more explicitly a citizen science project.
Okay, well, thank you very much all for your questions. Thank you, James and Dave, for presenting. Yep, this presentation will be available to view in the next week or so on the Digital Futures website. So if you've lost any data and want to review it, you'll be able to find it there. Thank you all for joining us on this miserly August afternoon. I hope you have a lovely afternoon, and we'll see you at another event in the future. Thank you again, James and Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.